Blood satellite.
This, I think, Germany might be over.
A couple of Canadians just found out about Kant, so I'm sorry, but it's now over for Germany.
I just found out about Kant being horny, and Germany's just been deleted. This reminded me of an article that I was shown recently, and I didn't really read it, but it's a Substack from The Intrinsic Perspective, and the title, written by Eric Howell, the title is "Why We Stopped Making Einsteins." Why don't we have Einsteins anymore? Why don't we make them? The subtitle is "Aristocratic Tutoring 1: Explaining the Decline of Genius." And there's this idea, and you see this a lot with older intellectuals. Once you read about a lot of the great philosophers, even a lot of the great writers of many, many generations ago, you'll hear, like, you're like, well, what do they do for work? It's like, well, they didn't work. They had patrons. They just had someone who would be supporting them their entire life, or they were from well-to-do families, and they were given all this expansive tutoring due to their place in society. So that just really rang a bell in my mind by thinking that, oh, a lot of the great minds that we know of were allowed to flourish because they didn't really need to worry about where money was coming from. And arguably, maybe they would never have produced any of this work if they actually had to. This is a very blue collar sounding point I'm making, but for a lot of us, like, the idea of just being able to fuck around and write for years is such a foreign concept, right? And like the closest that they can come is like, oh, you're supported by your mom. It's like, no. You would have your own apartment. You would have just like a rich guy who's like, I'll support you your whole fucking life in almost a Dickensian way. And there's a whole. I'm just going to read the post that was about it. It says, here's some pull quotes from it. Geniuses of the past were aristocratically tutored. And here's what's interesting. It says aristocratic tutoring was not focused on measurables. Historically, it usually involved a paid adult tutor who was an expert in their field, spending significant time with a young child or teenager, instructing them, but also engaging them in discussions, often in a live-in capacity, fostering both knowledge but also engagement with intellectual subjects and fields. As the name suggests, it was something reserved mostly for aristocrats, which means no way around it. It was deeply inequitable. It's a tradition that goes back as far as one can find. For example, consider one of the greatest statesmen of all time, and how one of the few true philosopher kings, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Wish they would have found a more recent example, but whatever. If genius were just a matter of genetic ability, then in the past century, as the world's population increased dramatically, and as mass education skyrocketed, and as racial and gender barriers came thundering down across the globe, we should have seen a genius boom, an effervescence of the best mathematicians, the greatest scientists, the most awe-inspiring artists. So, but we haven't, have we? Like, we really don't see. Maybe it's comparable, but it doesn't seem that it scales with the amount of progress we've made in these fields. And it's making a point here that aristocratic tutoring blows away other teaching methods, and in addition to decent genes, is critical to creating productive genius. As we can see, the number of productive geniuses has plummeted in recent decades despite a boom in population. But are human experts needed for aristocratic tutoring? And this is where AI teaching comes in. And I think this is where the post is really going. It's like essentially just chatting with a super smart AI, both you efficiently targeting your questions and efficiently targeting its answers in ways that previously tools simply could not do. So it's reintroducing this idea that maybe the way to foster genius in the youth would be to get something like aristocratic tutoring through AI. Now, what you would need is highly advanced AI, because there's the limitations placed on the AI that I've been dealing with is really frustrating. Like, we test out AI chatbots all the time in some of these groups that I'm in. And oftentimes they make mistakes. Like they're just not very good. You ask them questions and it gives shit answers. It's just like it pulls up a Wikipedia and rephrases it, right? So you would need like an AI that's designed for engaging with not only a mind but a young mind to try and develop it and encourage problem solving and ask it questions back to the kid and things like that. However, that seems like an interesting idea. Now, first, do you accept the premise of that? And second, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. But I think AI is a stupid solution. But I agree. I totally agree that the education system probably does more harm than good, and that one-on-one tutoring, I don't think is just having a more consistent, like a focused education on one kid. That's part of it, but it's definitely also it coming from a person. If you want that person to go out and interact with robots for the rest of their lives, fine, let it be an AI. But what you want to create genius, you need to start with the material of genius. You need to start with a grown man who is a well-respected academic in his field. And then you're mapping not just the information, but the mannerisms and the way he carries himself and the way he responds to questions and the way that he has an attitude of inquiry or of disdain or whatever. All of that is also mapped onto the child. So it's the same thing as with parenting. Like, you can't just fucking use technology for all of this.
Well, and the funny thing is that I was likening this back to our Immanuel Kant example, because there we see an example of what happens when genius, certainly, is allowed too much freedom, too many tutors, too many servants, and just given free reign. Now you got a guy who's fucking ordering you to like keep his erection under control and can't stop drinking coffee. Now, just imagine if that was like also with Ritalin and Adderall and fucking meth and gooning.
I mean, we don't have to imagine. That's like a good chunk of our generation already.
Yeah. Imagine what would happen with aristocratic tutorship in the era of gooning. None of us are getting out of this alive.
Oh, no.
But I find that the idea and the concept of AI, like it would need to be such an advanced AI, because the AI that we have right now that I've been dealing with in some groups that I have is very rudimentary. It essentially just rephrases Wikipedia articles, but like what you would need from a person is like someone to like ask you questions back to guide you through into a higher way of learning, which so like that the AI would need to be designed for that and designed for a young mind. This idea that we can just make a super intelligent mind. It's like no. You need to create a mind that knows how to teach, which is very, very difficult to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, I just wanted to bring people's attention to that because I thought that's an that might be something that maybe young people like not even Gen Alpha, and we're still calling them Gen Alpha, right? We haven't changed that.
I am.
It's kind of stupid that we started naming generations like that, isn't it?
I don't think so. You got to call them something. I don't know about the alpha, beta, theta thing or whatever we're going to be doing, but I think look, they're distinct categories that if you don't want to name them, you're essentially saying they aren't distinct categories and there's no point to discussing. If you want to discuss it, you have to accept it. They need to be named.
Would we accept the claim? I'm phrasing this in a dumb way. Let me think about this. What if we just didn't say that they're distinct categories? You know what I mean? Like
what? Like boomers and millennials are identical? There's no differences between them?
Or it's just like a gradation. Like there's different circumstances, but saying like they're different teams.
Oh, okay. I mean, okay. So if we're talking about like from a phenomenological standpoint that there are differences, but looking at it as a spectrum rather than discrete categories, yeah. But I think that just makes it harder to discuss. I think like for example, color is a spectrum. But we don't talk about color as a spectrum. We talk about primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. We talk about these 12 colors, you know?
That's true.
Just because it's easier to grab onto. You can't. How do you put a name on a spectral range?
Yeah, okay. They could figure if millennials are being called Gen Y. But then it's like millennials, then it's Gen Z. So they understand that there's Gen X, then millennials, then Gen Z. It's a strange naming convention, and then it just starts over.
Rename millennials Uber Kings. That's the new name. Yeah.
We have to figure. It's almost like you need to name them in retrospect or hindsight.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it doesn't like setting them up with a name. Like we're the silent generation called the silent generation at the start. I don't think so. I think they decided that partway through because they weren't fucking saying nothing. I guess.
I wonder how they looked at naming generations prior to the wars. Because I feel like all of our generations are names that came from the post-war years. Like our recent 3 generations were named before we were born, so they're just XYZ, or like millennials, Zoomers, whatever, which are related to the year of our birth. And then the previous generations, like the baby boomers, right, and the silent generation and the great generation. Like, why are they called the great generation? Well, because they won the war. Okay, but I mean, you didn't know that when they were born. You weren't calling them the great generation when like 5 years before they were born.
Also, let's be clear. They call themselves the greatest generation.
Fucking,
which is annoying.
They're all dead now, so I'm not going to speak ill. But yeah,
yeah. If they're so great, why are they dead?
Dominating.
Come at me,
Jay Burden had the best tweet. One of my all-time favorite tweets. It was in response to someone who was hosting a poll on Twitter. And the question was, it was one of those sort of manosphere type questions. And it was, would you ever marry a woman that's widowed and has children? Right? Yes or no? And his response was, why would you marry an unlucky woman? And I never, I said that to my wife and she's like, I never thought of that. Like, yeah, exactly. Same thing in Greatest Generation. If they're so great, why are they fucking dead? If the greatest should still be here, then I guess they're not the greatest.
I guess.
The greatest is going to be the first generation that lives forever.
Yes. Correct. The only correct answer.
But it does seem like, I'm going to get off into like a weird space with this next thing, and I don't want to spend too much long in here, but it's somewhat related to what we're going to talk about. There's this... Again, I'm hearkening to this McLuhan book that I've been reading, and I'm almost done. Understanding Media, Extensions of Man, and he's talking almost in metaphysical terms about the impact of media and language. It's really interesting stuff. But he's talking about how, like, the birth of numbers kind of came out of this idea of physical discreteness, like the idea that things aren't free flowing, that you can segment things. Yeah. And he's talking about the advent of time, not time as in space-time as a fourth dimension, but time is something you measure with a clock, because our modern conceptualization of time with a clock is far different than how the ancients perceived time. And the clock kind of gave birth to this idea that there's things that happen between 2 points in time. Like, it kind of changed, like, here's the firm lines of time, and things exist between these, and we mark them. So it's almost like the measurement of time in a utilitarian way, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's a completely new way to not only conceptualize time, but your relationship with it as like time as containers of events, discrete containers of things that happen. And the same thing with generations, like prior to the post-war years, because this kind of started seemingly with the greatest generation. Were they doing this in the 17 or 1600s? No, but maybe there's something distinct and relevant to the modern experience in the 20th century, that the fact that we have these firm borders between generations is like the advent of the clock, the stopwatch, because before that everything was free. Every generation flowed into the next, right? Just like time flowed and everything flowed. Everything was holistic. But the fact that we segment things so well defined, I think there's something there. There's something interesting there. And the fact that as the generations go on, we've created sub-segmentations. Like we have the Zillennial, and we have the Gen X millennial. Like I'm not a Gen Xer. I'm kind of in this in-between space between Gen X and millennial. Like, so we've got subgroups and then subgroups within subgroups, and we're segmenting our own generations more and more as the generations go on.
I remember feeling that too, because you and I, our age bracket, like we got John Talley in the chat, right? Who's like a fairly young Gen Xer. and we're only a couple years out from being Gen X ourselves. So we have more in common with somebody who's like 42 than we do with somebody who's 27 or 24, right? But that 20 I don't know the exact age, but say like a 25-year-old technically is a millennial. But it's like I have nothing in common with a current 25-year-old. And likewise, I'm sure a guy right now who's 42 has nothing in common with a guy who's 62, who's also Gen X technically. So yeah, there should be a spectrum. You know, I was going to say, I wonder if prior to these discrete generational distinctions, the way that people talked about it without forming discrete categories was like the bitches born between 1992 only know how to eat hot chip and lie.
Yeah,
like that type. You know what I mean? Like you form your own little division conversationally. It allows you to talk about this because these are all real phenomena which are important socially. So people have probably always talked about it, but without having a discrete category, you have to be like bitches born before 1992. Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is, like, you would always have kids and teenagers and parents and elders. You would always have that snapshot. So in that sense, all throughout time, there was like the elders and then the youth, and their relationship would be probably similar across different cultures. You know what I mean? And teenagers always had a similar sort of relationship to elders as well. So it's like you always had old people and young people, but it's whether or not this type of old person is a different category than this other earlier type of old person. Those are the discussions that we get into right now. Whereas in the past, they might have said all old people are kind of the same. You know, you go back to the Bronze Age, there's like old people back then were probably the same type of guy from the 1200s or whatever. They might have believed that, or they wouldn't have thought about like qualitatively different brands of seniors. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's interesting to think about. And I'm not saying that we need to change. That's just a phenomena that we live with. And that's just, a manifestation of the times. And I think I just see that progressing in the same direction of like the time frames getting smaller and smaller and smaller until it's like quarters of generations that are so like distinct due to the amplification of technology. All right. So I don't know if I was going to talk about this one Substack that I had read because it was going to relate a little bit. I'll just talk about it briefly because it relates to the main thing I want to talk about. So this is a Substack that I found written by an individual who I'm familiar with called Wrath of Gnon. And that's Wrath of Gnon, Wrath of Gnon, .substack.com. The article is titled The Human Scale. Subtitle is Defining the Human Scale as it Relates to Towns and Cities, Part 1. There's 3 parts.
Ooh, nice.
Very interesting series. But basically, I wanted to bring this to your attention because it relates to something that we've talked about on the show before and we talk about in our spheres, which is other people might know it as the 15-minute city. The idea of the optimal size of a town or community or a living situation, which is sort of like the antithesis to the suburb. The antithesis to a place you live that requires a car to get from point A to point B. And the reason I thought this was interesting is because we typically know this as the 15-minute city, and it's described as like a measure of time. But it's more than just that. It's not just how long it takes to get somewhere. And he lays it out here about like what is the ideal human scale? What's the ideal human group? And how does that function? Because I think that's the right way to look at it. When you ask questions about, it's not just how it's designed in a utilitarian way. It's like, what do you want the humans to be able to do, knowing that humans live here? And he's got just a couple parts here. One's called the horizontal human scale. He says a human scale town is one where you can live almost your entire life within a walking distance. In a human scale town, work, rest, play, pray, essentially all everyday tasks happen within a radius that the average person will easily and happily be able to walk on foot. The radius is usually given to 10 or 15 minutes depending on who you ask. However, the term human scaled is not exclusionary. You can have a human scaled town and still have access to cars, trucks, and public transit, like in central Tokyo. Sometimes relatively smoothly, like Tokyo, sometimes relatively unhappily so, like Damascus or Amman in Jordan. Having a human scale is important, but it does not guarantee a good place to live. And that's what he mentioned that, and I don't think that's in the conversation. That's like, we assume that a human scale town will just, or the 15-minute city will just, that'll make people live happier. It's like, no, there's terrible towns, and also there's towns where people have cars and trucks. 15-minute cities, like, it doesn't mean that it's like a car exclusionary zone. You know what I mean? Because that's how some people think about it. Like, it's an anti-car place, but it's like, no, you could have smaller human scale towns that are full of fucking trucks. It's just, within reason. But he also talks about something here, which is the vertical human scale. And he says the human scale applies to the vertical as well as the horizontal. The ideal human scale puts a limit on the verticality of buildings. He says, once again, the human scale is not exclusionary. You could have a scaled town with just 2-story buildings. Like, he's saying that what we tend to do is build like horizontally 15-minute city, but have these really tall apartment buildings and skyscrapers in it. He's like, well, that's the same problem, because it requires elevators, and like, especially if it's a very tall building. He said, no building ideally should be taller than it is comfortably to walk up all the stairs on a regular basis. Now, what do you think about that?
Well, I've lived that, and that was one of the culture shocks from coming back from Hong Kong, which is that in Hong Kong they call them wedding cakes, which is kind of a funny thing. But they build these buildings that the first 2 floors are wide and flat, and it's like infrastructure, public transportation, power generation, and then above that, from like floors 4 to 7, is like commercial offices, medical offices, schools, retail, malls, parks, and then the final 30-40 floors is just apartment buildings. And it's funny because people there criticize it because it's like, it's so bland that I'm always stuck in the same place and I never get to go out anywhere. And it's like, you don't fucking know how nice this is compared to other places. Like, we would go down our elevator. Like, I get the whole thing about like, you don't want to rely on elevators, but that seems like a specious argument. Like, I don't know how that argument belongs in this conversation when you're talking about like urban development for the future. We're assuming there's always going to be electricity and maintenance, right? So if you have the elevators, I go down, and this is my experience, I go down the elevator in the morning, and as the minute when I exit my elevator door, I am not on a busy thoroughfare. I am on a beautifully maintained garden and park with other families. And I walk about 20 meters, and then there's a wide staircase that goes down 2 floors, or also an elevator beside it, but I usually take the stairs. And when that takes me down into a public plaza in a square, which is surrounded by retail and schools. And then if I walk past behind the school, there is another set of stairs that goes down even further, and that goes to street level where I can get a bus or get on the subway. I lived like that for like 10 years. It is fucking amazing, man. It's actually excellent. And that's why I'm kind of torn about all this like anti 15 minutes at like serious. And the whole time I was there, I didn't own a car because I didn't need a car, because everything that I have is so close that not only can I walk there, I can walk there holding a toddler in my arm and then walk back up. So, but it's all elevators. That was extremely vertical. This is literally one building. Like, it's one city block.
That's perfect. So you've actually lived this. So you would be a very valuable insight in this. Would you say that you mentioned previously that a lot of people would complain about that? Was that a common occurrence?
It's a common complaint, but a lot of complaints, and this is a thing that I've left with after living there. Most complaints of Hong Kong people are like white people problems, except it's Hong Kong people problems. They're complaining about shit because they have a television formed impression of what Westerners' lives are. Like, they think all Westerners live in like beautiful suburban homes with manicured lawns, and they all go to the yacht club. And it's like, no, you don't get it. Suburbs, actual American suburbs, are hellscapes. Because like, for the reasons that we're talking about here, you take for granted that your kids, the school for your kids is farther away vertically than it is horizontally. So when your kids get out of the elevator each morning, they walk to school for 3 minutes, and the distance that they're walking, the only other people in that zone, because you're 6 floors in the air, are other kids and families who are your neighbors, and like, the level of safety and community and efficiency is fucking unreal. So, but they don't know that. To them, it's like, well, I wish I had a Porsche. It's like, look, we all wish we had a fucking Porsche, but not everybody gets a Porsche. You should be glad that you have this system of medication and education and infrastructure that most of the world doesn't get.
Yeah, no, it's like you don't understand. Everyone in the West drives trucks that the Taliban drive.
Yes.
You don't fucking get it. We live like lighthouse keepers. It's like, everyone like watches House of Gucci. That's what I want to be. No, watch The Lighthouse. That's how we live.
Yeah. I take my kids to daycare, and we're happy to find a place that we like, and it doesn't even bother me that much that I have to drive 9 minutes. But I have to put my kids in car seats in an SUV and drive 9 minutes at 100 kilometers per hour on a 400 series highway to get to a daycare so that another person can watch my kids. When we were in Hong Kong, all of that was within not 9 minutes drive on a highway, but within 3 minutes walking distance. And not just walking, but it's literally in the same building. So like there are no outsiders. There are no people here who don't live or work in this building.
And he makes a point in the article, the Substack here, that's very close to the lived reality of a lot of people, which is like, look, when you got kids, if they don't live within walking distance, then you're their chauffeur for years. Right. Like they just can't just go walk. It's not safe, and B, they can't walk on the just fucking side of the road for 2 hours. And especially if you have a wife that doesn't drive. My wife doesn't drive. This is what's like living a trad life, everybody. You want to know what it's like? You know, I've no problem with it. I enjoy doing it, but that means that I'm driving everyone everywhere all the time. And then her parents when they just don't feel like it, you know, sometimes but that's like, imagine not having to do that. Anyway, but I like the fact that he was not only thinking about it quantitatively in terms of walking distance, but also qualitatively, which is how you look at it, which is what is this space used for? And, you know, are we just building vertically for the sake of building vertically? Whereas it sounds like yours actually makes sense, and other places it might not make. And also the idea that you can have a 15-minute city, or you can have places like this that are filled with the wrong type of people, and all of the utilitarian urban planning, the dream of utilitarian planners doesn't work if it's filled with just shitty people or shitty culture. And you know, because we see that now currently. And I like that he gave examples like, look, there's quote unquote 15-minute cities all over the Middle East too. Just making something walking distance doesn't make it a good city. And I just wanted, this sort of leads into the book that I want to talk about. And I'm not going to try and keep you too long because Judas has a job now. I can't keep him up too late. The book I'm talking about is called Experiences in Groups and Other Papers by Wilfred Bion. It's either Bion or Bion, one of those two. This fits snugly with our talk about empire and communications, I think, and also some of the stuff we're going to get into in the next few episodes. But it's speaking about this book is interesting in the wake of speaking about The Therapeutic State by Thomas Szasz, because this is a book written by a psychologist. This is a account of a psychologist discussing his experiences in dealing with psychiatric groups. And why is this relevant? Why do we care about this? Well, is actually mentioned in Thomas Szasz's book, which was very anti-psychiatry and very critical of psychology, even though he is a renowned psychologist. The idea was, this idea of just the individual with mental illness is a fiction, right? He has this one line that I loved in that book, which was, you cannot really define a loner or a neurotic hermit, because they would say that's a mental illness if you're like a hermit. You can't define them without defining the group that they are excluding themselves from. That even when you exclude yourself from a group, you're still doing that within the context of that group. You know what I mean? It's like the problem is
brilliant.
Because the problem with psychiatry, it's always like everyone's just an individual. It's like, no. You always have to look at people within the context of whatever their community or their group is.
Yeah. Like if somebody comes to you and says, I'm eternally oppressed, I've been kicked out of 107 countries. It's like, well, let's talk about those countries.
Exactly. Well, yeah, exactly. It's like everyone's got, even a negative reaction is a reaction, and you're within the context of that group still. And that's kind of what this is about. Bion, he's got an interesting story. He's like, he was one of the few guys who's like, I'm going to look at psychiatry within the context of groups. How do people behave in groups? How do individuals behave? How does the group work as this sort of organism? What are the commonalities we see? Because that's how most people behave. They behave in the context of whatever their group is. Maybe it's their class, maybe it's their family. Usually within the context of these groups, it was interesting. So he describes how early in 1948, the professional committee of the Tavistock Clinic, asked him to take therapeutic groups employing this sort of group therapeutic technique.
He and others at the Tavistock Clinic were drafted into the Army during World War II and began working on new methods of officer selection, which he termed leaderless groups. He also developed a new approach for helping soldiers with post-traumatic stress, then known as shell shock. At the Northfield Military Hospital, he initiated the first Northfield experiment, in which patients were given responsibility for their own rehabilitation. This laid the groundwork for what later became therapeutic communities.
And he's like, I don't know why they wanted me to do this, but I did it anyway. And he had some experience being commissioned by the Army, the American military. He was doing early experiments with soldiers who were, for one reason or another, on leave. They're in like a mental, not an asylum, but a mental hospital within the base, because they have various neurotic problems or whatever. And his task was like, kind of get them in a room and have these group sessions and just see how the groups behave and how they behave in the context of the groups. And he learned a lot about this, but I'll just kind of set it up here. He says, psychology and psychopathology have focused attention on the individual, often to the exclusion of the social field of which he is a part. The individual is and has always been a member of a group, even if his membership of it consists of behaving in such a way that reality is given to the idea that he does not belong to any group at all. The individual is a group animal at war, both with the group and with those aspects of his personality that constitute his groupishness. So it's like the individual is always at war with what he wants and what the group wants, and how, he's got this great line in here about when you look at people who are like members of a group, like a group of 7 people. He's like, it's interesting to notice that people like being in a group because they expect their will to be expressed anonymously by the group. Like you hope that you can get what you want without having to say anything, and it'll just kind of manifest by the group. And when it doesn't, you kind of get pissed off, but you don't know what to do about it. So you're always at this tension between, like, you are aware that you're an individual, but you are aware that like the group is an extension of yourself in some respect. And there's like this constant sort of gradation there. Anyway, he says he gathers a group that wants to be taken and discuss group psychology. So what he would do, it was this funny experiment. He's a psychiatrist. They know he's a psychiatrist. He gets a group of people who volunteer to just discuss psychology generally. And he would kind of sit them in a semicircle around himself, and he wouldn't say anything for the longest time. And he would just kind of watch what they do. And he would see the dynamics at play, where like some people were like expecting him to lead the group. And then they would say like, well, are you going to do something? He's like, well, what do you want me to do? I don't know what I'm doing. And like, would they get mad? Would they get frustrated? And then he would notice that, they kind of start forming their own group against me. Or some do, but then this other group will actually still want me to be in charge and tell them what to do. Like they're dependent on me. So like the group dynamic, depending on who's in it, based on the age of the individual or the gender, or whatever, the groups start to form whether or not he does anything at all. Now that's interesting, isn't it? And whether or not that he's like an enemy or not. He pretends not to know why they are there and states that he can't give them what they want. He watches the group dynamics form based on this. Someone takes charge. The presence there was based on, he'll like say like, I don't know why you're here. You tell me why you're here. Like, it was just you come in here with all these assumptions. What do you want me to do? And he says he's arrived at a theory of the group as giving evidence of work group functions. So he's got these like two types of groups, these two like broad categories. There's like work groups and basic assumption groups. And the basic assumption groups are kind of the more interesting ones. The idea of a basic assumption is that basic assumptions are made involuntarily, automatically, and inevitably, and that they kind of define the behavior of the group. And these are like anxiety, fear, hate, love. They all exist in the basic assumption group. And the basic assumption is like, you assume kind of why you're there. You assume someone must be in charge. I'm here. Someone must be. You assume that, or you assume that, someone. There's certain assumption groups where it's like, I have a fight or flight mechanism. Like, I can either leave or I can fight this person because they're not what I thought they would. Like, basically, a dependent group is a group that's driven by emotion. And it's driven by anything other than like a goal.
It is important to emphasize that these types of basic assumptions do not contradict each other. On the contrary, they can coexist and alternate in the same group. The basic assumptions are opposed to change and growth and are always underlying in any work group. When not recognized and untapped, they block the group's ability to think and find solutions to difficulties. Bion was categorical in saying that psychotic anxiety and primitive defenses are the ultimate source of all groups' behavior.
And so once you have these groups that are kind of gathered and they don't have a purpose and they don't have a direction that's given to them, they start to form around really, really weird things. And we'll kind of get into those now. He says for the basic assumption groups, he knows there's a few different types of them, a few themes that emerge. One is a fight or flight group when they're kind of presented with this reality. There's two more types he noticed. There's the pair bonding group, where individuals in the group kind of make friends with each other as couples. And sometimes they begin like a romantic relationship. And I've, just anecdotally, I've noticed this even in my own workplaces. Like, if I'm in a workplace that is in chaos and no one really knows what's going, if anyone's been in an office where this happened, or any corporation, sometimes you like zero in on someone who's like you. It's like, and that's like us against the rest of the workplace. Like, we're going to kind of be in cahoots. That's an interesting dynamic that forms. And that's why he calls them basic assumptions. He's like, I kept seeing this happen so often that I think this is a pattern that we see across maybe all group formations. There's the fight or flight, or there's like the dependency group, which is that they become so dependent on authority that they almost can't do anything else.
Rather than seeing the leader as someone with flaws and blind spots like the rest of us, this preoccupation is seeing the leader as an all-knowing and always correct oracle of truth and director of action. Seeing the leader as mighty, a team doesn't question their direction or take independent initiative, and rather than putting their attention on the work, you find them obsessing about how the leader sees things.
And he says, well, here's how a group is defined before we keep going. Like, what is a group? What do you mean when we talk about a group? He says, a group is defined by a common purpose, whether that be overcoming an enemy or defending and fostering an ideal. B, a common recognition by members of the group of the boundaries of the group. So you know who's a member and who's not in some way. C, the capacity to absorb new members and lose members without fear of losing group individuality. D, freedom from internal subgroups having rigid boundaries. If a subgroup is present, it can't be centered in any way. E, each individual member is valued for his contribution to the group and has free movement within it. F, the group must have the capacity to face discontent within the group and must have means to cope with the discontent, even if that's kind of inelegant. And G, the minimum size of the group is 3. 2 members have personal relationships. With 3 or more, there's a change in the quality of the relationships, but it can't just be, the minimum is 3 and the maximum is usually around like 12 or something. And he makes a point here. He says it's not necessary for a number of people to be brought together. The individual cannot help being a member of a group, even if his membership of it consists in behaving the idea that he's not in it at all. So even rebels within these kind of group settings were still part of the group in some way. And in fact, he says, here's a quote. He says, "I have recent memories of a group in which my exclusion had been openly advocated. For another, while saying nothing, simply ignores my presence and excluding me from the discussion. On some occasions, the reaction has taken the milder form of suggesting that I have already excluded myself from the group and that I make things difficult by not participating." So there's different versions. And he's got an interesting case. I'll get to that when I talk to leadership in a second, but he says group members, and this is another interesting thing once you study groups. And let me just actually start by saying this, that I was talking to a good friend of mine named Theron about this because he's really big into this book. And there's a lot of people in our circles who really like this book, and I like it very much as well. But I do wonder, because one aspect of the book is that he doesn't give a lot of details, because he can't, because a lot of the stuff is patient doctor confidentiality. He doesn't give names, he doesn't give places, he'll just speak vaguely about these groups, right? So we actually don't know any of the material circumstances or any of the filtration processes that brought these people there. We kind of know early on that some of these people might be soldiers, or they have some interest in psychology, right? But we don't really know the race. We kind of know the gender sometimes, but there's this idea that we're talking about how all groups behave. However, whatever you might think of this, he might very well have been filtering for Americans and also white Americans. So to say that all of these group dynamics would be in, fucking New Guinea Bushmen, or, in this North Koreans, who's to say, there's this sense, really what people do when they take this book. I'll make the argument as best I can. I'll steel man this argument. The argument is that with these two types of groups, there's the dependent group, and within there you find religion, you find ideology, you find authoritarian hero worship, you find all that emotional stuff. And within the work group of people who are more concerned with getting the job done, they make all of that emotional, ideological, spiritual stuff subservient. And all that matters is like the task at hand, which means that ideology, emotions, belief is just made up bullshit. Who cares about it? That's the argument that they often make. For people who want to step outside of ideology. And fair enough. However, I do want to bring attention to, like, we don't know what the filtration or the vetting process was for any of these members, other than some of them might have admitted to being mentally unwell. But they might have a lot of cultural similarities that, there might have been certain conflicts that were just accounted for because everyone's already this same race, same ethnicity, and maybe even from the same geographic area. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of conflicts that might emerge in groups that we're not accounting for in this book. You know what I mean? That's just like a little asterisk I would include. But we'll never know. Maybe there's a lot of black people and fucking American Indians. We won't know. Anyway. He's got this line here: group members are always forming an estimate of the attitude of his group towards himself. If one person says something and it goes unchallenged, that becomes the opinion of the group, even to its members. Despite this, when prompted, each individual will deny that the group is ever judging any individual, or that they're judging others. Unless the group is actively disavowing its leader, it is in fact following him. And this is, I actually think that is true. When you're talking about group dynamics, like, and how, even though the individual always sees himself at odds with the group, I think it is true to say that unless you're really going against the group, you essentially believe whatever the group says. And unless a leader is challenged, the leader can just assume the position. and that's just generally what happens. And he's got an interesting point here. And he's talking about one group in particular. He's like, this group at the moment seems to be led by two absentees who are indicating that there are better ways of spending their time than by engaging in this sort of group. At the present session, this group was led by one of the members now absent. And like their presence is felt still within that group by them not being in that group after previously leading it. It's like they can never engage with the group properly ever again. So he's just introduced the idea that a leader can still be a leader when they're absent, and also like especially if they're absent, because their absence is almost like saying the group's not worth it. Just like an interesting note that I thought was cool. He says, if the group can provide means by which contributions can be made anonymously, then the foundations are laid for a successful system of evasion and denial. I shall postulate a group mentality as the pool to which the anonymous contributions are made, and through which the impulses and desires implicit in those contributions are gratified. And I liked that analogy, that a group mentality, the group organism, is a pool that everyone feeds sort of like their anonymous contribution, which also, like you said before, people will always deny that they're judging people, and they'll deny that the group is judging them, but that's always happening, right? And also that they kind of hope that the group does what they want, even if they're pretending that they're not really actively a part of it. And so like the group takes on this like its own essence in a way, and you're connected to it no matter what you do. I think that's interesting. And also like, and this is kind of what we were talking about before about like the ideal human orientation or organization, or the human scale. Like, what is the ideal human scale? It's like it's for something that is designed for human use. And I don't think we design things for group use. I think we design things for individual use. That's not the way to design things. You have to design things with like the group organism in mind, which is actually how that thing that you were describing was built. Like, here's how groups fit together. Here's how families fit together. That's how communities used to be ran. It's like, it's how families fit together, not like this one guy, right? Which is how everything is designed now. He's like, group mentality is the unanimous expression of the will of the group, contributed to by the individual in ways of which he is unaware, influencing him disagreeably whenever he thinks or behaves in a manner at variance with the basic assumptions. Group culture is a function of the conflict between the individual's desires and the group mentality. And I thought that was a kind of a cool way of phrasing it. He's got this idea here called the proto-mental matrix, because there's this idea that people kind of behave a certain way when they're in a group, but that's not to say that they don't bring anything to the group. He says that's what the proto-mental matrix is, like bringing your own assumptions, bringing your own emotions, bringing your own preconceived ideas. He says it's from this matrix of emotions proper to the basic assumptions that flow to. So the basic assumptions like reinforce, pervade, and dominate the mental life of the group. In my opinion, the sphere of proto-mental events cannot be understood by reference to the individual alone. He's kind of defining a proto-mental event as this sort of synergy between the physical and the mental. And it's a weird, and this is kind of what Thomas Zaz was getting at in The Therapeutic State and other older psychologists, which is that the idea of just psychological issues don't exist. Everything is really tied to either the environment or the physical. And if you can't tie it to either, then it probably doesn't exist. He says his thesis depends on the argument that there's a stage in which the physical and mental are undifferentiated when the disease of these problems and neuroses in the group manifests itself physically, like as tuberculosis or something. So it's like when you have tuberculosis, there's like a psychological condition that comes with tuberculosis. One doesn't really cause the other. They're just two things that happen at the same time. You know, it's not like syphilis makes you go mad. No, it's just that your syphilitic mind is occurring in concert with the syphilis. The mental events to which tuberculosis is affiliated are neither cause nor effect. They're derivatives and developments from the same proto-mental phenomena as those which tuberculosis arises. So he's not trying to make a mental condition subservient to the physical or the physical subservient to the mental. He's like, they're both two phenomena that kind of happen at the same time. And he's saying the same thing with psychology of groups. He's like, there's certain like physical aspects that are at play here. And it's not just like free floating ideas and desires, which is an interesting way of looking at it. And he comes up with these basic assumption groups. Like one is called the dependent group, and the dependent group is a group that really becomes reliant on a leader, and they cannot exist without being told what to do. And sometimes that's him, and if he says he doesn't know what to do, they'll like get mad at him but still demand he tell them what to do. They're lost without him, or they elect their own leader. And this is something you'll see kind of often in these situations. He says there's a commonality when he was dealing with mentally ill patients. He said there's a close connection between the dependent group and the leadership of the group with the most psychiatrically disordered individual. So he found with these groups that they always tended to pick the most insane person to be their leader or the most psychopathic or the most neurotic. And he describes that as what he calls the holiness of idiots. Or like the belief that genius is akin to madness. He's like, this happens so often. It's like its own self-contained phenomena. He says, this belief that genius is akin to madness all indicate the same tendency of the group to choose, when left unstructured, its most ill member as its leader. And that could be seen in a lot of ways, like even with like various revolutions. Like you pick the most radical person to be the leader. Well, maybe the most radical person is the most fucking insane, but they're also the truest believer sometimes. But we tend to, when we're in a group, tilt more towards the more powerful personality as a form of authority, but maybe that powerful personality is the most insane and unhinged and the least qualified to lead. But it just seems to happen, and it happens with, in these psychiatric groups. Maybe it happens elsewhere too, right? The most extreme person as the top vanguard. In the search for a leader, the group finds a paranoid schizophrenic or malignant hysteric if possible. Failing either of these, a psychopathic personality with delinquent trends will do. Failing a psychopathic personality, it will pick the verbally facile, high-grade defective. If I leave things to develop, many remedies will be proposed. Revolt against the chosen leader. A claim that treatment should be available to all, and so on. He says oftentimes these reflect responses that we've taken in history to these sorts of individuals. The group is compelled to recognize that the spontaneously chosen leader is seriously disordered or a genius. At the same time, it is compelled to believe that he is the dependable leader. Now, this can only be done by a series of oscillations from one view to the other. If I refuse to intervene as the leader, as the authority in the room, and I have tested the situation several times by letting it go very far, even too far for safety, these oscillations become very rapid. The result is that the group can no longer contain the emotional situation, which thereupon spreads with explosive violence to other groups until enough groups have been drawn in to absorb the reaction. If they come in too slowly or in too small amounts, then the oscillations spread to hitherto inert and in the situation is more disagreeable than ever. So he's kind of saying, he's almost taking a metaphysical approach. Like, okay, you have this leader in the group who for whatever reason is the leader, and you're always switching between he's insane, but he's also a genius, right? And you're switching between these at the same time, which causes kind of a feedback loop. Now you're searching, the group almost wants to expand to include others to neutralize them. But if it spreads too slowly, you just get new recruits. You need to come into conflict with another group that can like actually neutralize it and stop it. Or if it grows too slow, it spreads like cancer. And he's seen this in a clinical setting. Like he'll just sit back and watch this group develop into this like fucking runaway beast all around, almost this cult of personality. And again, this is in contrast to a work group. Like this is just like people they come here looking for order. They are not given order. When they're not given order, what happens to that group? And remember that they cannot not exist in a group. The group forms whether or not an individual wants to be in it or not. And that I always come back to that fact. Like the group is just something that happens, and that you're either drawn into it or you like leave the room entirely. But most people don't. Most people don't. They pick the fight or flight. Very few people pick flight. Sometimes they do, and the ones that do end up being the leaders of that group sometimes. But it's like the idea of the group as like this permanent thing that you can't even exist outside of, and that if left, unless it has a task at hand to do, and it has a goal and a mission, this is what happens. And you see like microcosms of civilization and society in these small groups. He mentions this guy McDougall. McDougall's distinction between the simple unorganized group and the organized group seems to me to apply not to two different groups, but two states of mind that can be observed to coexist within the same group. I attribute great force and influence to the work group, which, through its concern with reality, is compelled to employ methods of science in no matter how rudimentary a form. Despite the influence of the basic assumptions and sometimes harmony with them, it's the work group that triumphs in the long run. So he's making the case, and this is the case that a lot of people take, that, you know what, as long as you have like a material goal grounded in science and reality, you can make all these other basic assumptions and all this other emotional weird shit subservient. Now, whether or not people agree with that, that's to be debated. I think because some people will take what they learn in this book and apply it to the rest of society, that anyone who is religious is as deluded as these people in these groups. I don't think that's accurate, but they're trying to say like, oh, as long as you have a materialist mission, we can just step outside of all this other bullshit and all this conflict and all these cults of personalities and religion and spirituality and all of that. So when you hear people bring that up, that's usually what they're doing. I'm not saying they're wrong or dumb or they're having the wrong read on the book, but that's just like the main message to take from the book if you really like this book. And he gives some clarification here. What is a work group? Well, he says the demonstration of work group function must include the following. The development of thought designed for translation into action. Right? The theory, in this instance, the need for the theory in which it's based, which means like you have the development of a thought. We have to take thought and put it into action. We have something to do. And we have a theory on how to do it, which is like get along with each other. The belief in environmental change as in itself sufficient for cure without any corresponding change to the individual. And finally, a demonstration of the kind of fact that is believed to be real. So basically he's saying that you have to do a task, to accomplish a mission. It must be measurable in the real world. It has to be real. And you have to have some rules on how to get that done. And all your emotions and all your beliefs are subservient to that mission. And he says, if the specialized work group cannot or does not cope with the basic assumption phenomena, like we've talked about in these other groups, then the work group functions of the main group are vitiated by the pressure of the basic assumptions. And he says, as work group function consists essentially of the translation of thoughts and feelings into behavior, which is adapted to reality, it is ill-adapted to give expression to basic assumptions. So he's basically like, as long as you're trying to take a thought, put it in action, and do a thing, all this other shit just won't emerge. Again, not sure. I'm not sure that's real. I'm not sure that's accurate. And I'm not sure that wouldn't emerge if you had more conflicting personalities and identities in that group. Again, we might be filtering for people who already kind of get along, right? Like if you have a group that is full of, these days, like a white guy, a black guy, a Jew, and a Muslim, it actually might be very, very difficult not to fall into basic assumption problems or look for a leader or to put the mission above whatever emotional, ideological stuff you have going on within the group, right? You like it almost assumes like you might need to already agree on most things to experience the work group function. That's my belief anyway. I welcome anyone to push back on that. And he says, like, all basic assumptions include the existence of a leader. That's one of the things that make it unique. Whereas a work group doesn't necessarily need a leader. They can cooperate as long as they have the goal. But for a basic assumption or an emotional group or an ideological group, it needs a leader. he's got this interesting part here that he spends quite a bit of time on this, and I guess I'm just leaving it at the end here because I find it interesting. But he says, in the pairing group, the leader is essentially non-existent or unborn. The leader need not be identified with any individual in the group. It need not be a person at all, and maybe even identified with an inanimate object. And he makes the point, it's like, every one of these groups, dependent groups, basic assumption groups, needs a leader. If you don't have a person, it can take the form of a law or a book or a constitution. And a good example of that would be the American Constitution. The American Constitution is in effect linked to the founding fathers. The Constitution is just a conduit through which you can still follow those leaders. That's why it's so powerful. That's why, Marxism is so powerful, because it still is tied to Marx and Lenin and these powerful leaders. But I liked the way he described that, where it's like, any written rule that has the most profound emotional effect can also just be seen as the extension of a profound leader operating through that rule. But if it's too abstracted, it doesn't work. You know what I mean? Like it's not followed. Just like the Bible, like a Bible would be another example. Like the Bible is inextricably tied to the individuals who wrote it. It's not just a book of fucking rules, right? He's got one line here. It says, from his experience of analysis, Freud was able to deduce the significance of two of what I've called specialized work groups, army and church, but did not discuss the specialized work group that attaches most importance to breeding and is therefore most likely to have to deal with the pairing group phenomena that we've been talking about, namely the aristocracy. If the aristocracy were concerned simply with the external reality, its activity will be far more closely resembling the work of a genetics department in a university than it does. But the interest shown in breeding has not the scientific aura we should associate with mental activity directed at external reality. It is a specialized work group split off to deal with pairing group phenomena in much the same way as an army has to deal with the fight or flight phenomena and the church with the dependent group phenomena. So the church has to deal with internally the problems of people following like priests that are getting a bit too uppity or something, and like every work group has to deal with its own internal basic assumptions in certain ways. And I just like that he pointed to the aristocracy, because the aristocracy is like a work group, but it's about breeding. It's to breed the best result, and it has to deal with like its basic assumption it's dealing with is like the group pairing or the pair bonding, which maybe love gets in the way of good breeding, is what he's saying. But he's like that's the conflict between that work group with its mission and its goal. I just thought that was kind of a cool example. And anyway, that's more or less what he talks about in the book, and I hope I gave it justice, but I really do want to just kind of circle back and summarize it about the difference between these two groups. There's the work function group, or the work group function, and the dependent groups. And so he's making the case that organizations of individuals can make all of the conflict and ideological problems subservient if they have a mission that is grounded in reality and can be kind of measured scientifically. And you see this in the army, and you see this in institutions that do pull off these group organizational projects. But he is saying that if a groups always form no matter what. Groups don't necessarily need your voluntary approval or consent to form or for you to be a member of them. And if you lack that sort of work function, you will fall prey to basic assumptions, which is then you'll probably fall to some kind of weird leader, look for authority. You'll create all these tensions in there. It'll just be a fucking mess. And he's making the claim that it's in these basic assumption phenomena that we have ideology emerge, religion, spirituality, all the things that a lot of the materialists don't like. And again, I don't agree with that, but I do think there's some truth in this. But also the asterisk that I talked before, which was that I think a lot of these experiments may be filtering for people or races or identities or ethnicities or whatever that already are not conflicted in any serious way. And if you were try to build a work group with a bunch of conflicting identities, I don't think that work group would function very well. Now, what do you think of all that? Did that make any sense?
Yeah.
And again, these are just his experiences, and his experiences in the mid 20th century, looking at groups as if they were an inevitable experience of an inevitable human experience, that you cannot actually have an individual unless you talk about that individual in a relation to a group, even if they exclude themselves from that group. And their relationship with that group almost defines who they are as a person. And there weren't a lot of people talking about that. And that was completely antithetical to a lot of psychiatry, which was just on a one-on-one individual basis. Is that you cannot understand people that way. You have to understand the individual within the context of the group. And here are several examples of context. And I still think, even if you don't think this explains the entirety of society or the entire outgrowth of civilization, I think you can look at a lot of your workplace, whatever group that you're in, and see and survey your own history and find, like, maybe you've seen these phenomena before about like lack of leadership. What happens when there's lack of leadership? What happens to what are the actual group dynamics? Even if you see yourself as separate from it, because you're probably not. Anyway.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.